Let's see. I've got the reading quiz, my lecture notes, and the worksheet. Yep, I'm all set. Off to mold the minds of the future. Hi again, everyone. I'm so glad you made it back. We're continuing with the series of the 5 requirements for tight classroom management. In this video, we're talking about the 3rd requirement, active engagement. Before we get started though, I want you to imagine your favorite teacher, or maybe not your favorite, but the one from whom you learn the most. Picture that teacher in your mind and think about a typical day in that teacher's classroom. Did things move quickly in that room? Was that teacher well planned? Did they always have something for you to be doing? Did what you were doing in that room seem to really matter? It's likely you're remembering them because the way that you were highly engaged in that class. If you follow some of the evidence-based suggestions that I have for you in this video, someday you're going to be that teacher that someone thinks about when they're asked to remember their favorite teacher. Remember, my goal with these videos is to help you develop your competence in all things teaching. Help you find your strength and your voice of advocacy for yourself and for your students, and help you create justice by dismantling systems of oppression all around you. Now, let's remind ourselves of the 5 requirements for tight classroom management so that we understand how what we're talking about in this video fits into the bigger picture. First off was maximizing structure. Second, establishing and teaching rules. Third, actively engage students during instruction. Fourth, use a variety of strategies to respond to appropriate behaviors. And fifth, use a variety of strategies to respond to inappropriate behaviors. So let's get started. One of my favorite lines, and one that I use very often in my own classes, is that the best classroom management system is engaging instruction. I would rather put in an hour of lesson planning than an hour of writing referrals any day. So knowing that, you might have to choose how you're going to spend your time, or someone else might choose it for you. Now, the definition of engagement, specifically cognitive engagement, is the psychological effort students put into learning and mastering content. So, if you're doing a great job of channeling their focus into learning, they're not going to have a lot of excess energy to put into misbehaving. And we're going to accomplish this maximization of engagement by maximizing 3 other factors that you do have control over. We're going to maximize time on task, maximize opportunities to respond. Don't worry if you haven't heard about these before. And we're going to maximize your classroom's culture of engagement. Let's focus on maximizing time on task first. Let's consider this simple math equation. Time on task equals allocated time, how long your class period is, minus how many interruptions you have and how long transitions take. You can't really change how long your class periods are, so the only way to maximize time on task is to minimize the interruptions and how long your transitions take. By transitions, I'm talking about how long it takes for students to get settled once the bells ring, or whatever your cue is for class to start. Any time that's wasted in collecting homework or passing out papers, or other materials or supplies, or taking attendance, or the inevitable packing up as the time for the bell to ring approaches. I know these things all take time, but by reducing the amount of time that's wasted, we can recover some of that time and put it towards engaged learning. And every minute that the students are engaged in learning is a minute they're not engaged in tomfoolery. So let's talk through a list of strategies that I've compiled from my experience that will help you maximize time on task. First, and this is the most important lesson that I've learned about the connection between lesson planning, time management, and classroom management. The days on which my students always had the best behavior were the days when my lesson plans had a sense of urgency and real purpose. Those days, for example, when we needed to finish the chapter and get the test done before spring break, There was no time to waste. My worst teaching days were the days when I didn't completely know why I was doing what I had planned. That lack of drive gave me permission to chase rabbits and allowed me to let things go haywire. If you know you must get things done, you will make sure they get done. So the first strategy is to always build in a sense of urgency and purpose. Communicate that to your students. Have that in your soul when you enter that classroom, and you will move with a sense of purpose, and your students will feel it, and everyone will be charged up for learning. Second, give clear and concise instructions. When someone gives you instructions, do you like them to do it in a long and rambling way? I highly doubt it. If you need to give a long set of instructions because you're introducing a complicated project, they better be written down anyway. I'm not saying you shouldn't go over the directions, but if you're expecting that anyone will remember a long set of directions that aren't clearly communicated, that's not going to happen. Some students might need task scaffolding, which is a procedure in which you only give them a single step of a multi-step operation to do at a time. This accommodation should be available to anyone who needs it as part of a universal design. But if you have a question about universal design in learning, leave a note in the comment about that, and I'll say more about it in a future video. Third, you should have quick transitions, and so should the students. Teach procedures you need daily so that no one is wasting time doing things slowly that should be happening in the blink of an eye. Whatever tasks you do with regularity in your classroom should be systematized or routinized in a way that they can be handled quickly and the students know exactly what their jobs are. They should know where their needed materials are, how to get them efficiently, and how to be back in their spaces quickly. And this goes for you too. Make sure you have your materials ready before class starts so that you're not wasting time hunting things down when the time comes to start. Finally, avoid training your students to expect free time every day. You don't have to make kids labor constantly, but you can have some ungraded activities in your bag of tricks that reinforce the standards that you're teaching or that you've already taught, or activities that students can do that go beyond giving them time to play on their phones. Have a plan for the last few minutes of each class that is an enrichment activity, something fun, something low stakes, or maybe a bit of a challenge. Make sure that it won't throw you off if you don't get to it, but that it still adds to the content that you're teaching. If the activity has right answers, post a key somewhere in the room so students can check themselves. But don't collect the work, and don't take it upon yourself to grade it. If you forget and you do collect it, never throw it away so that the students see. The next big category of things we're going to maximize is opportunities to respond. An opportunity to respond, abbreviated as OTR, is a teacher behavior that requires a student response. This is a concept from applied behavior analysis that is very important in some areas within special ed, but while lesser known in gen ed, it can be really powerful. Using the ABC model of behavior, antecedent, behavior, consequence, the teacher's action becomes the antecedent or the trigger for a student behavior, and then the teacher can be ready to offer a consequence in the form of feedback, which will help shape whether or not the student continues to respond in the same way to the teacher moving forward. It's kind of setting up the student to get a reward. If they do like you ask, they will get a reward in the form of praise or points or a handshake or a high five or something that makes them feel like they're participating. And we want to have as many opportunities for that as possible. That's what keeps kids engaged. Explained in the simplest way I can, maximizing OTRs is maximizing students' participation in their own learning. I like this concept because professors or principals or mentors will often talk about beginning teachers needing to increase engagement in their classrooms. But explaining how to do that can be difficult, and it's really hard to measure. But counting how many times the teacher required a student to respond is a very tangible way to communicate what engagement looks like. And I think it's something we all inherently can understand and it's something we all have under our control. When I explain this first set of individual teacher-directed opportunities to respond, you might think that it's a little ridiculous to label some of these teacher behaviors with an acronym like OTR and say that they're an evidence-based practice. But I want to reassure you that this starts out as super obvious. It's just calling on kids. But it's really sophisticated when you understand what's happening here from a scientific behavioral perspective. It's something we'll go into more in the next video when we start talking about responding to appropriate behaviors. Anyway, teachers can direct these OTRs to individuals or to groups. And teachers can call on individual students who have indicated that they know an answer by raising their hand. Duh, obvious. This can reward students who are quick thinkers and overlook the others. So to get more students to dig into the thinking, teachers can ask all students to think of an answer and give a thumbs up when they are ready. If the teacher waits until all students indicate that they've got something, more students will have an opportunity to respond and be rewarded with positive attention from their teacher for volunteering in class. Teachers can continue offering individual opportunities to respond by calling on students in a predetermined order, such as going up and down the rows, or a random order, as in popcorn reading, when the teacher calls out the name of a student who becomes the new reader and takes up from the last word read by the previous student. The popcorn method can cause a lot of anxiety for some students who are prone to stress out, so you might want to develop an agreement with those students that you won't call on them unless you're standing directly in front of their desks. Similarly, I've worked with some struggling readers who really benefited from knowing when their turn was coming up. They could count how many students were ahead of them, so they could count down to which paragraph they'd be reading, so they could pre-read it. Each method has its pros and cons, and you'll have to know your students and their strengths and needs to know how each method will affect them. I've divided the teacher-directed OTR to groups into 3 categories based on different levels of tech they might require: no tech, low tech, and high tech. In the no tech group, teachers can get a whole class to respond at once by asking students to respond in a choral fashion to a prompt in unison, for example. If I said, "The planet closest to the sun is," and the class responds, "Mercury." Choral reading is another way for the entire class to be responding at one time. Nonverbal responses are another way to accomplish a group OTR. My favorite example of this is the fist to 5 response. This is a method of gauging how well the class is understanding the lesson. At your signal, students hold up either a closed fist, indicating they don't understand the lesson at all, or a 1 to 5 fingers that indicates their level of understanding, with a 5 meaning they completely understand it and believe they could even teach it to others. I have a link to a poster of this graphic printed on magnetic sheets available from Amazon in the description of this video. I will earn a commission if you click through the link and finalize a purchase there. Finally, physical responses are another way to achieve a group OTR. I was formerly a Spanish teacher, and we used a method called Total Physical Response, or TPR, in which we only spoke the target language to our students, modeling the physical actions that our words corresponded to, and over time our students would be able to respond to the Spanish commands, never having had the words translated into English. In practice, in a typical non-language classroom, this could be represented by students following instructions from their teacher to line up or hand in their papers or put their books or devices away. Another way of using physical responses would be for having students respond to true or false questions, or any question that could be answered with a binary answer. Students answering true could stand next to their seats, while students answering false could stay seated. Similarly, a strategy called corners would have the teacher label the corners of the room with relevant words or phrases. Students would then move to the corner that matched their response to prompts or questions. Teacher-directed group OTRs using low tech could include guided notes. Guided notes are copies of the teacher's notes for the lesson that have blanks left out in strategic places for students to write. This allows them to listen to the lecture and still be responsible for taking notes. Each blank would be considered an opportunity to respond. Response cards are another item that could be purchased or created by the teacher. You can see an example of some response cards on rings in this example. As the teacher asks a series of questions, students could find the response card that corresponds with the correct answer and hold it up. Students get a chance to respond, and the teacher is able to gather formative assessment about how well the students are understanding the content. Classroom whiteboards are a low-tech way of getting groups of students some OTRs as well. Depending on the class size and the amount of whiteboard space available, the teacher can call students to the board to work out problems or write answers while others stay in their seats. After each problem, different students take their turns at the board. Individual whiteboards are another way to approach this. They can stay at their seats, work the problems, and hold up their work when prompted. Teachers can see who is understanding the work and who might need help. This could be a bit more private than the whiteboards on the wall. I've provided a link to these dry erase paddles available at Amazon in the description. A do-it-yourself way of creating these is to go to Lowe's or another hardware store and buy a 4-foot by 8-foot panel of shower board for less than $15. Ask the workers there to cut the panel into appropriately sized pieces, and you can get at least 16 individual whiteboards for under $15. Buying the dry erase markers is the expensive part. The high-tech teacher-directed group OTRs are probably things that you won't be using very often, but I wanted to include them so you know that they exist. There are different smartboard integrations available. Some schools have clicker systems where each student gets a remote so that they can do the response card system but electronically and with a confidential option. And most of the video conferencing platforms offer some sort of polling options, and the chat can be used for responding as well. Teachers don't have to be in charge of all opportunities to respond. Students can respond to each other in peer tutoring or other partnering or cooperative learning arrangements. It's likely that almost everyone has heard of the Think, Pair, Share by now, but what about doing a Think, Write, Pair, Share to shake things up a bit? Or you could even try a Think, Pair, Share, Square, in which after the thinking, pairing, and sharing is over, you have two pairs get together to talk about the ideas that were shared in the large group. Numbered heads together is one of my favorite cooperative learning activities. The teacher divides the class into teams of approximately 4 students per team. Students on each team number off from 1 to 4. The teacher poses a question and gives time for teams to form a response. No one knows who will have to report until the teacher calls out a number that corresponds to who will be the reporter. All students have to be equally prepared, so the students have to work together to make sure that all team members will be able to speak to represent the team. Whenever I teach about opportunities to respond, my students and I are filled with excitement about the possibilities of these strategies until I tell the students the following key to the success of these evidence-based practices. We need to provide for 3 to 5 OTRs per minute for verbal responses and approximately 1 per minute for written responses. Written responses take longer, so we need fewer of them. 3 to 5 per minute is approximately 1 every 12 to 20 seconds. That's a lot. Of course, I'm not coming to your classroom to measure how many you're doing per minute, but this should serve to underscore the importance of keeping your pace up and really keeping things moving. This might be a great time for us to stop and make sure that you've clicked like on this video, that you subscribe to this channel, and that you've put something in the comments below so that we all know what you're enjoying about this work. Make sure you're sharing this with your administrator, make sure you're sharing it with your friends, and get the word out that your teaching coach is here to provide you with some good information. Thank you so much for all your support. Finally, a third thing we need to do to maximize active engagement is to maximize a culture of engagement in our classrooms. Culture means many things at many levels. And when I'm using the word at the classroom level, I'm referring to the shared thoughts, feelings, and actions that are spoken and unspoken, and that exist among any group of people that share time and space. If there's a belief about homework in your classroom that's shared, that's part of your classroom culture. If there's an ethic of compassion that's in your classroom, that's part of your culture. It's possible for the members of your classroom to have a cultural orientation towards engagement as well, or that you as a teacher are communicating a value about engagement that you're not aware you're even communicating. Antonetti and Garber in 2015 published a study based on over 17,000 classroom visits in which they came up with 8 questions that defined high-level cognitive engagement. I'm sharing those questions here and referring to them as a way to create a shared culture with your students that values engagement. Does the activity, strategy, task, or idea allow for the student to personalize his or her response? Can they bring their life experiences into the activity and make it their own? Why wouldn't we want to provide opportunities for students to do work that reflects their lives? Meaningful work is meaningful work, whether your students are 6 years old or 60 years old. You all want meaningful work, and your students would expect the same thing. Are there clear and modeled expectations? I see this becoming more important as students get older. Kindergarten students are willing to create without examples, but have you tried to get a graduate student to do something without a model? Schooling has taught them there are consequences for thinking out on their own, so they beg for examples. Providing these models and letting your students know the extent to which you want them to think beyond what you've provided to them is really important. Number 3, is there a sense of audience above and beyond the teacher and the test? Does the activity have value to someone else? Think about this. At what point does a doodle become art? When does research become scholarship? And when does curiosity become knowledge? I don't think the point of this question is that we have to set up an exhibition for every assignment. But I do remember the joy of sending an early primary kid home with a portrait they made of their shadow, or of some art project made of macaroni, or of a paper flower they made for their grown-up. There's nothing wrong with helping our students make something that they can be proud of and that's worth sharing with someone they love. Number 4, is there social interaction, and do students have an opportunity to talk about the learning and interact? Some people are perfectly happy to work alone, whereas others simply cannot work by themselves. Do you provide opportunities for all people to work as they are most able to? Number 5, is there a culture of emotional safety? Are mistakes valued because they are an opportunity to learn? What do you do to assure that your students feel safe to make mistakes? Are mistakes a sign of weakness? If you haven't talked to your students about adopting a growth mindset, this would be the perfect context to do so. Number 6, do students have opportunities to choose within the activity? Too much choice, and we might not know where to begin, but not enough choice, and we wonder why bother to start. Number 7, is it an authentic activity? This doesn't mean that it must always connect directly to the student's world, but it should connect to reality. Especially in a multicultural context, we need to make sure that we are working all students are represented in the lessons we provide and the work we're asking them to do. And finally, number 8, is the task new and novel? If kids are bored, is it hard to see engagement? Scope and sequence are important. Don't grab an activity because it seems cool without knowing if it's been done elsewhere in the student's curriculum. Check with someone who has some history in the organization, or look at a curriculum map to make sure you're not replicating someone else's good work. I found this list of questions quoted in a book by Dr. Rebecca Stobaugh from 2019 called 50 Strategies to Boost Cognitive Engagement, Creating a Thinking Culture in the Classroom. I was just supposed to be researching for this video, but I ended up reading this entire book in just a few hours because it captured my attention so deeply. If you're interested in digging deeper into these ideas of maximizing engagement and at the same time working to help develop your students' higher level thinking skills, I highly recommend this book. I'm strongly considering adopting this text for one of my college classes, but I definitely won't have my students purchase it through the affiliate link in the description. The way it's organized, it could be used by any teacher to help create a more engaging lesson plan for almost any topic. In summary, Maximizing active engagement is going to lead to better behaviors from your students during your class. In order to maximize engagement, you need to maximize the time your class spends on task, how you give students opportunities to respond, and the culture that you create in your classroom around engagement. Minimize time spent in interruptions, transitions, and work that doesn't have meaning to you or your students. Spend your time getting students to move and talk and read and listen to each other about the content you're teaching and how it connects to each one of them. Tell them your stories and listen to theirs. Create alongside them and appreciate their mistakes and their masterpieces, as they are all part of the journey. The topic of next week's video will be techniques to respond to appropriate behaviors. So until next time, stay strong, stay healthy, and get some rest.